What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Big Five Pod, episode number 122. I'm, of course, your host, Kyle Morello. Next to me, co-host Jake Copestick, both co-hosts. Cope, we're gonna have an interesting conversation later with Jonathan Tannenwald of the Philadelphia Inquirer about the NCAA versus House settlement with NIL, and it's a lot to even try to almost explain right now. So I'm gonna let that conversation breathe when we get there. But first and foremost, how are you doing?
Doing well, Kyle. Weather's been nice. We're halfway through the year. Isn't that crazy to think about? We're halfway until 2026. But yeah, been good. It's kind of slow. Roster's pretty much filled out. It's been pretty slow. So nice that we could have Jonathan on. And I'm no legal expert in any of this stuff, but we can at least talk it out a little bit. How it can affect men's and women's basketball in the city on a national scale. What else could come of this? Just a nice, kind of change of pace to hopefully make things a little bit more digestible for everybody and just talk about it more in depth because it's only been out for about a week. The NCAA passed it, I think, at 9 o'clock on a Saturday. So conveniently did it when they thought nobody was going to see it.
Of course.
But it's massive news. The ramifications are bigger than what we realize it is now. We'll actually have to see it put into place when it hits July 1st. But nice to have Jonathan on, talk it out a little bit, get a little more familiar because there's a whole lot of legal jargon here and it affects people before this year and stuff. There's a lot. So I felt like I came out knowing a little bit more. Hopefully listeners do the same and just understand it a little bit more because it's a lot to be thrown at you right now.
Yeah, and like you said, we're not going to claim to be experts on this situation, but or this topic rather, but we're going to try our best to break it down for you. I think we did a good job of that, and hopefully you guys agree and feel the same way, and at least can understand a little bit what's going on. Because this is the first legal action really in the NIL era, so it's going to have a little bit of regulation, and we're going to talk about what that could affect or how that could affect the Big Five. So, Cope, before that though, a couple things to get into. You should grab that ball because we're going to get to your quick hitters right now. Let's run the break. What do you got for us?
Yeah, going to be really quick today, so that way we can have the main event here take up most of our time. So one scheduling note, well, actually two. We'll get into another one. I'll quick touch on one that's confirmed. High Point, going to host LaSalle this year. Friday, December 19th, down in High Point, North Carolina. LaSalle headed down there. Obviously, High Point, the Big South winner last year. Alan Huss makes the move over to Creighton, where he's going to be the head coach in waiting and then take over for Greg McDermott when he decides to hang it up. Flynn Clayman steps in, was an assistant on the staff last year. Not going to be as good of a team, but they have a ton of resources in the Big South. They out-resource just about everybody there. This is going to be a very, very solid non-conference game for them as they continue to fill it out, which I don't have a graph in front of me or a chart, but with the MTE, with the Big Five games, we know the Coppin State opener that we talked about last week. We now know this game. It's starting to fill out a little bit here. Darius Nichols' busy summer is coming to a close, which is nice. But yeah, High Point going to host LaSalle. Really good mid-major, low-major non-conference game for them to head down there. Kyle, one more just came out a couple hours as a coaching note, just a couple hours, quite literally, is 2 hours prior to us recording. Nat Graham, who used to be the associate head coach at Penn under Steve Donahue, he's headed to Cornell to join John Jake's staff, where he coached John Jakes on the 2009 Cornell Sweet 16 team that Steve Donahue, of course, was the head coach of. So a place he's familiar with, a league he's familiar with, not too far away from him because these firings of staffs happen and you could move all over and it could take a toll on these guys. So good to see him back on his feet. Funny enough, Kyle, not only was he at Cornell for a handful of years, one of which was that Sweet 16 team that Cornell had in 2009 where they actually beat Fran Dunphy in the first round, but from 2005 to 2009, 3 of the 4 members of the Cornell Big Red coaching staff was your head coach was Steve Donahue, one of the assistants was Nat Graham, and the other assistant was Zach Spiker.
Wow.
Pretty crazy. But he's headed back up there where the beautiful thing about the Ivy League, Kyle, is, and this is a scheduling, jab at the power conferences because Duke is not going to play Miami, despite Miami hiring Duke's one of their assistants in Jai Lucas. You never have to worry about conference realignment. I can guarantee you Penn will see the Big Red twice this year and maybe a third time if they make the Ivy League tournament. But quick little coaching note on there. Kyle, it's not finalized yet, but there is some rumors, there is some speculation that it's certainly pointing one way as opposed to the other. We have a scheduling news I don't really want to say as a quick hitter because we should spend some time on this. Could you tell us more?
I can tell you a little bit more, Cope. And like I said, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it either because it's not confirmed. We don't want to speculate too much or go into deep dive on something that's not 100% going to happen. But there are rumors that St. Joe's might not be playing in the Players Era tournament anymore. Don't know why, don't know the reason, don't know what's to come of it, but there are rumors among the interwebs that St. Joe's will not be participating in the Players Era tournament in Vegas anymore, which of course they were slated to for probably over a year now at this point. Last year was the first Players Era tournament. So yeah, I don't know much more about that. I know you don't know much more about that. So we'll see what happens. That's why we're not going to deep dive on it right now because it's not confirmed. And yeah, that's it. That's all for that. And yeah, but Cope, we have more exciting stuff to get into right now, and that would be our interview discussion, not necessarily an interview, but a discussion with Jonathan Tannenwald of the Philadelphia Inquirer, talking about the House settlement with the NCAA, what that means for Big Five teams, what that means for college basketball, college football, Olympic sports, all the nine. We're going to get into it right now. Here's our discussion with Jonathan Tannenwald. All right, everybody. As promised, we have Philadelphia Inquirer reporter Jonathan Tannenwald with us here to talk about the NCAA versus House settlement that's going to affect not just college basketball, but all of college sports. But Jonathan, how are you? How's it going?
It never stops. You know, it's not always college basketball, as you guys know, as I'm sure none of your listeners know, but it never stops.
No, no. And as Cope says all the time, we do sleep in May. That's what they say, but we never actually sleep. There's always things going on. So, yeah, we have a lot to talk about. And this one's going to be a little bit of a different one. We're not, talking about a specific roster. We're not talking about the Big Five specifically on this, although we'll obviously touch on, how this affects the Big Five. But this is about the NCAA versus House settlement that has to do with NIL regulation, I think is the best way to categorize it. And it's very new to all of us, and we're still kind of learning everything that is going on. It's only about a week old. This settlement became official. So we're going to try to break it down for you guys as best we can and, give us insights on how it affects schools in the Big Five. So why don't we jump right into it? The first thing I think about it that's the biggest headline I think that people recognize is that there's $20.5 million for each school to distribute among all of their athletes. That includes football, basketball, soccer, baseball, and then Olympic sports and everything such. So it might be a little bit different than what we're used to now because there's reports out there that there's SEC football teams that have rosters of $40-50 million. I don't know how true that is, but I wouldn't doubt it. And certainly we've heard in the NCAA basketball world that there's rosters that exceed 12 million. And stuff like that. So a lot to get into with this, but Jonathan, your thoughts first in general on what this settlement agreement means for college basketball.
Look, I have for a long time, including and in particular on those of your listeners who listen to Aaron Bracey's show know I've been saying this for a while. I am in favor of paying college athletes. And the reason why I'm in favor of paying college athletes is because they're working and not getting compensated in a way that's equivalent to their labor. And people will say, well, I don't care. And my answer is, okay, but you're watching on TV and the broadcast contracts are worth billions of dollars. And that money is either going to the conference commissioner's fourth assistant, the 76th assistant quality control coach on the football team, or the players. I'd rather it go to the players. That's my way of looking at it.
So, Jonathan, I think another huge thing that I am thinking about when it comes to this is what the role of Title IX plays in it, because now I see today Oklahoma is saying that they have 6 sports set aside that are going to be in this revenue share model. They're not going to include everybody. So there's a bunch of different things to look at. First of all, you have that. You have, with a football team, a disproportionate amount of male athletes that will be a part of this as opposed to women. You have a bunch of schools have been cutting Olympic sports as they put NIL into the moneymaker programs, and the non-revenue sports don't get it. Now we have roster limits that are going to affect some schools. The people that are there now are grandfathered in. There'd be a whole hell of a lot more lawsuits than there already is if they started cutting people that were there now. But just your thoughts on the role that Title IX could play in this, because I have a feeling, like, just seeing this from a glance, I have a feeling there's going to be a whole lot of Title IX stuff going on here that it's not going to be proportionate if football gets a lot of money and yada yada. I know it's long here, but how do you see this affecting Title IX and it being an issue there?
And let's take care of the elephant in the room as we start this discussion. Any court or political handling of a Title IX lawsuit is going to be affected by who's in power, and we know who's in power. I don't claim to know who all your listeners support in that regard. I don't know if I ever will. But we know who's in power, and we know that that might impact things. And I'll leave it at that for now. Because, yeah, there's a problem. And I've heard people say that football ought to be exempted from Title IX. And some of those people are in the women's college sports world. Because it is difficult to square. It is difficult for schools in general to get to equality with big-time football. And it is difficult for schools to square this spending with big-time football. Now, the thing that I find interesting about it is, and this doesn't always come to pass around here, well, everybody here knows that women's college basketball is popular, right? That's for sure. And we know that the Big East teams have generally committed to spending some money on their women's programs, and that includes UConn, obviously. But it also includes Villanova. Eric Rodel and Denise Dillon have said that they're going to have some money on the table for this. And we've seen them go to work with that this summer, keeping Jasmine Basco, getting Kylie Watson from Notre Dame, and so on. In other parts of the country, if you actually pay attention, which not a lot of people do, I realize, women's college softball is very popular in the Big 12 and the SEC. Women's college gymnastics is a massive thing in the SEC and increasingly as a television product. Women's college volleyball in the Big Ten is a very big deal, especially in the upper Midwest. Wisconsin and Nebraska are two of the powerhouse schools, and Penn State's also been very good at it over the years. And you can get into, go up to Massachusetts and women's ice hockey and so on and so forth. And you can go down to some of the women's soccer programs. There are not as many of them as there used to be, but certainly people have heard of North Carolina. I think they know about Stanford and UCLA and a few others. So, yes, this is a very big deal. This is a very, very big deal. And I hope, but I'm not naive enough at all to believe, I don't think any of us are, that people are going to shovel all the money into football and come back and say, oh, wait a minute, our gymnastics program is supposed to be really good. What happened? Well, what'd you do? You took the money away from it. Of course you did. Of course you did. They know exactly what they're going to do. And I don't have a lot of sympathy for it. I don't know anybody in the Big East who does either. And I do know that some people in the SEC, once the terms of this settlement were being finalized, realized, oh, wait a minute. The Big East teams are going to be spending more on basketball than we are, which means that they might beat us in the NCAA tournament. We can't have that. Well, they made their own bed in that regard. And so I have no sympathy for them.
I have one more, and then we can just kind of both fire back and forth here. But Jonathan, on that point, you have a Villanova who since just moved football to the Patriot League, but is still in AA. And a lot of those schools in the Big East just straight up don't have football. They don't even have a AA program to want to spend money on football or have any Title IX concerns. So a two-parted question for you. Number one, the advantage in the Big East, like especially, and maybe potentially the A-10 as well, that doesn't have football, for the most part is what? And then secondly, a Villanova-centric question here, because we all know about Villanova, the development, stay there a long time. And Kevin Willard got up in his press conference, and that sounds like that's what he wants to do. So if that's the case with Villanova, and they're going to have more money, especially in the Big East and these basketball-centric conferences, do you think that the player retention rate specifically in that league will be disproportionate from the others, and that there's a shot that Villanova can keep guys 2, 3, 4 years more than other conferences can?
It could be. I don't think we know the answer in full yet. I think it's nice of Kevin Willard to say that, but who knows? But yeah, I think it's going to be easier to keep guys with the money there. And I think that Georgetown, which also plays, I believe, Patriot League football, will probably tell you the same thing. Butler plays in one of the Midwestern 1AA conferences, I think. I forget about the others. So, yeah, it's, some of that's yet to play out, but I think it will be more likely. Whether or not it happens, I think it's more likely that you're going to be able to retain players in the Big East. Let me mention one other thing that I forgot to mention a moment ago. You mentioned the Olympic sports. And Pat Forty wrote very eloquently about this a couple months ago when the Pac-12 finally and fully fell apart. A lot of those schools that are in the ACC and the Big Ten now have produced a lot of the athletes on the United States Olympic team on swimming and track and so on for many, many years. And if that stuff falters, which it may well in this, because there are track powers in the SEC, and we know that in Philadelphia because they come to the Penn Relays every year, and we see Texas A&M and Florida and South Carolina and Texas and so on. So we've been exposed to that. If the U.S. Olympic pipeline starts faltering and people start looking around, asking what happened, let's remember this moment and remind them of what happened.
Yeah, and that's 100% true. And kind of along the lines of what I wanted to ask you now, because obviously with this budget of $20.5 million, and I believe I read on a CBS Sports article that it's going to go up a hard cap of 4% every year for the next, I think it was 10 years or something like that. But now schools have to budget their budget to, pay players in different sports. And I think I read in that article too that somewhere between 75 and 85% of that money for a lot of the major schools is going to go to football, which obviously doesn't leave a lot for basketball and so on and so forth. So I guess my question is, this was meant to level the playing field a little bit and bring some regulation, because before this we had not had any legal remedies for NIL. It's just all been kind of the Wild West for the last 6 or so years, and we've known this. But since this is now in place, how do you think schools will navigate budgeting, whether it's for football or for basketball or for Olympic sports, like you mentioned?
I think the SEC and the Big Ten are going to shovel as much money as football as they can. I think the Big 12 is going to shovel as much money at football as it can. The ACC, I don't know. The Pac-12 doesn't exist anymore. The American is probably going to shovel as much money as it can at football and then figure out how much or how little money that actually is. But, we can't say that because then they complain that they're not treated as a major conference. We've all been through that rigmarole before, which is part of why I don't care so much about that conference anymore. But that's for another day. They're going to shovel all the money into the fire and see how it burns. I don't know. And I don't care all that much. Maybe I should, but I have no ties to Penn State. And Temple's going to do what it does, and it has made that abundantly clear. We can talk about that in depth if we want. And Villanova, LaSalle, St. Joe's, and Penn are going to go about their business, and Drexel as well.
And I think more so what I wanted to find out from you is like the other side of this is leveling the playing field, not just for each sport and revenue sharing, but it's also in terms of college basketball. At the very least, this is what we're talking about, leveling the playing field between power conferences and mid-major and low conferences. Do you think that this is enough to do that, or do you think there will still be a disparity in poaching talent based on dollars and everything that we've seen over the last few years?
I can't imagine that it will actually do it because the powers that be don't want that to happen. And if it does, they're going to succeed. They're going to secede. And they're already talking that up, and they're talking about expanding the NCAA tournament even more, which is awful.
So bad.
I don't know if this is purely a radio show or a video show, but everybody just gave the thumbs down on camera.
It's both. They saw it.
It's bad. It's going to happen or not, but the Big Ten and the SEC are basically already talking about taking the sandbox and going home and not playing anybody else. I got nothing there. They want to screw it up, they can screw it up. Now, in football, it's not going to matter. If they want to play each other in football, I have no problem with that. The question is whether there will be football-only conferences so that all the other athletes on all the other teams don't have to fly from LA to State College and Berkeley to Raleigh and all this other junk that we all know about. They've all been talking about it. And if they do football-only conferences, maybe the rest of things in the ACC can go back to what they were. The Pac-12 can try to reconstitute something that resembled the Pac-12 for all these other, teams and players and whatnot. Maybe that's the ultimate answer. And how that affects basketball, I have no idea yet.
Jonathan, one thing here it's another budget topic, but I saw yesterday that with players now and student athletes making the money that they are, University of Michigan is going to have to cut its staff by 10%. I mean, you're going to have your athletes now will be paid more than just about all, if not all, of your administrators and your staff members. So from a support staff standpoint, and whether that trickles down to mental health or nutrition, athletic training, whoever it may be, like some of these schools, take a Drexel, for example, that maybe doesn't have, football, and some of those CAA schools that maybe don't have it, like staff wise and athletic department wise, you have all this money that needs to be filtered into your student athletes now that you're taking away that could be paying staff salaries, that could be used for capital projects. Like, how do you see that playing out? I mean, if Michigan is doing it, I have to imagine this is probably a trickle-down effect for a lot more schools.
I am sympathetic for the schools outside the power conferences. I am not sympathetic to the power conferences because if they treated the athletes better over the years, maybe they wouldn't have been sued.
No.
I am sympathetic for the staff who are going to lose their jobs. But I'm not always sympathetic to the bloat in the athletic department about how big the staffs become. And I suspect that some of these big schools can also go out and sell some sponsorship dollars if they want to prevent the sky from falling to quite this degree. Again, I'm sympathetic for the smaller schools out there, but this bed was made and now they have to sleep in it for a while.
So one more before I kick it back to you, Kyle. As far as conference realignment goes, I mean, it's all about TV. It's all about that. I mean, that is really like your deal breaker, your multi-million or billion in the case of the powers that be, like conference, revenue deal rights with TV. So in terms of like from a conference realignment standpoint, there's now a standardized salary cap. Now, not everybody has to spend up to that. It was reported that the AAC, to opt into the House settlement, needed to commit a minimum of $10 million for the first 3 years of this. So there's a cap. You can enforce your own floor, I guess. But do you think that the conference realignment will only get crazier with this, or do you think this House settlement tempers all the movement we've seen over the years?
I think it tempers some of it, but as I said, the question becomes whether there are football-only conferences at some point down the road, and that allows for a return to more regionalized things in all of the other sports. Other than that, I don't know.
Fair. And I guess now to center it back to why we're here and us, let's talk about it from the Big Five perspective. I know we talked a little bit about Villanova and how it's going to affect them. I think probably of the 6 schools, they're going to be the biggest winner because well, they have the most money and they also don't have a football program. So I think they're going to take a lot of their money. But in terms of the other schools, who do you think comes out a winner of this? And who do you think maybe doesn't benefit so much in the Big Five?
I want to say one more thing about Villanova, and it pertains to the Big East as a whole. Because the Big East, to I think their great credit, and we didn't know what was going to happen when the Fox deal expired. They've managed to get a deal now with Fox, NBC, and TNT that's going to put a lot of games on TV and streaming and popular places and all that. They have to figure out the women's basketball side of it that's been on Flow Sports that nobody likes. Last I heard, although it was a while ago, they're working on that to do something. Hopefully a better platform gets it. But all along, the Big East has been clear, much clearer than anybody else. We know what we're doing, and we're going to go do it, and we'll see you later. And I give Val Ackerman, who's one of the smartest people in sports, a lot of credit for that. I give the 80s and the presidents a lot of credit for that, because there's plenty of people out there who don't have the same clarity of mission and don't have the same clarity of purpose, and so don't have the same clarity of outcome. So they know, and as I've said to you guys and to a lot of people, I think this probably goes back to what Big East Media Day in the fall, whatever it was. I was talking to Val and a few other people for a while. John Paquette, who retired at the end of the season, the outstanding PR chief for the Big East for so many decades. Give him a shout out because he deserves it. What has the Big East been doing for all these years, if not playing minor league professional basketball in NBA arenas up and down the Northeast, sending the guys on to the pros, and it's all been done at a high level. They know what they're doing. They don't have a problem with it. So then we can talk about the other schools, and we're probably going to spend the most time on Temple. So we might as well just get it out of the way. And I can sit here and say a lot of things about, asking politely if they really know what they're doing. I know plenty of Temple people who are not so convinced. I know plenty of Temple people who think that they put far too much emphasis on football relative to basketball. We all saw what Diane Richardson said on Twitter a couple of months ago when all this was happening, and she was getting calls for her players, and she said on Twitter, "Would you all please call my AD instead of me because he controls the money?" And I don't think anybody disagreed with that, publicly or privately, from what the three of us have heard. And so Temple's got to figure some things out.
Yeah, no, I mean, 100%. I think, to be fair, they're going to support all of their athletic programs. As I mentioned earlier, Oklahoma said, hey, we have a group of not all of our teams that's going to be in the revenue share model. From a standpoint of total support of the athletic department, it's there. I'm sure people would like to see more money filtered into a football or a men's basketball, but they have at least they have the Al Excellence Fund. You can donate sports specific, so it's not to a general fund that might just end up in a revenue generating sports pocket anyway. But Jonathan, you bring up the conference earlier. We could go on and on about the American, because I think last handful of years, I think it's a very forgettable conference as far as tournament week, because they play in that empty arena, and thank God they're moving out of Dickey's Arena. And I really like the new commissioner that they have. I think Tim Pernetti's done a really good job with adding Army and Navy and stuff like that. But they want to win. I think they have a coach that can do it. And to an extent, they've gotten with the times here. But yes, reading stuff, I understand where you're coming from. I want to talk LaSalle for a second here, and then I want to get into some Penn stuff with you, because they're the one school that won't be, because the Ivy League, this isn't their MO to do stuff like this. But Ash Puri comes in there, they get a big-time capital project done right away. In an era where people are dropping sports, he's adding them, and he's adding programs, and he added a band, and they added a cheer team, and they brought baseball back. He's saying that he plans to use this money, the Glazier Arena project is done and the place is awesome, but he wants to use it to further use it for capital projects. What do you think of LaSalle in an era where people are cutting sports and would rather pay people and build a nice facility Like, what do you think of like his like zigging while everybody else is zagging here?
I think if it works, then maybe it shows that maybe it's not so hard if you don't want it to be. And I don't know if it's going to work, but if it does, more power to him. And if it attracts people and donations to the school, I got no problem with that. Their enrollment was shrinking so much for so many years that if they see this is a way out of it, then good luck, and hopefully it works.
I think it has to be. And Kyle, I'll let you. I just want to say something real quick on that point before I kick it to you. Like, Jonathan, this is a school that was reported by the Inquirer that like could have went under during COVID. Like, was very much in jeopardy of becoming defunct during COVID. And I think that's like kind of your one way out here. Like, I went to school there my freshman year. Like it's in the middle of a neighborhood. It's off Broad Street. There's not really a ton of room for like campus expansion. Like it just kind of is what it is, and you have to deal with what you have. But even for a small school, like I get it. Like they're bottom of the barrel in the A10 as far as like from a funding standpoint. But I think this is like their most logical way out is to pursue athletics. Like they're in a big conference and like, yes, like they're at a disadvantage, but if they can be good in this conference and Darius Nichols can put together a good team, like I think like this could be something. This could almost be like a life raft to them. Not that they've been in any sort of trouble since COVID, but something like this could legitimately elevate the profile of the school if athletics is the route they go and they choose to be successful in it. So.
And if they can get kids from the Philadelphia area, public and Catholic schools, who maybe aren't getting a lot of other offers, who don't have the personal resources to go far away, to want to come there, then that's a starting point. And I'll say too, I know enough LaSalle alumni who, when the hat gets passed around, they say, "Not me." And Ashbury said, "I'm going for it anyway." He got Glazer Arena done, not everybody else before him. And I wasn't, I'm not so deeply connected over there, but I certainly noticed that he was the guy who got it done.
Yeah. No, he absolutely was. And I mean, we're all thankful for it because Glazer's awesome. And it's really exciting to see the development of the athletic program over there, like Cope and you as well, Jonathan mentioned. I want to talk about the other A10 school as well in St. Joe's, and I guess more so the conference in general, because similar to the Big East, they don't have a lot of football programs. And they're probably in the similar boat where these schools are going to use a lot of their revenue for their basketball programs. And St. Joe's has been pretty well versed in the NIL world in the last few years, and I think we've seen that. I know the players, the NIL tournament that they're supposed to be playing in is up in the air a little bit. We talked about that earlier, but it's going to be interesting to see how this affects them as well. But as far as St. Joe's, do you think they're in a similar boat as like Villanova, for example, where they have some NIL money, but they also don't have football, so they can commit more to not just their men's, but their women's program as well?
Look, they don't have as big a base to draw from, but they've got a very committed base. They have for a long time. They've got some people with money, and they seem to be in pretty good shape. Now, it wasn't good enough shape to keep Xavier Brown because Oklahoma threw the house at him. That's going to happen. But they're in pretty good shape overall from the look of it. They're going to play in this tournament. What is it, this coming season, right? The NIL money tournament that's
I don't think it's happening anymore.
It's not confirmed, but there's reports out there that might not be the case anymore. So to be determined.
I did not see that. The tournament's going away or they're out.
They would be out.
Well, all right then.
We'll see what happens with that.
But overall, I think they're in a decent spot, and they need to get into an NCAA tournament one of these years, but if Rasheer Fleming gets drafted in the NBA, they're certainly going to look good.
Jonathan, I want to flip this to Penn now.
Yeah.
They're the one Big Five school that did not opt into the House settlement. Like I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, this isn't what the Ivy League does. They don't have roster limits. They don't have scholarships. They don't pay their players. However, Penn is trying to introduce this with Penn IL that they've had for about a year and a half now. So The Quakers are not in the House settlement. However, they're trying to bring an NIL collective to campus. You being our resident kind of Penn expert and alumni here, is there any progress on that being approved by the Ivy League? And if it does, I mean, you have some of the richest alumni base in the country from the University of Pennsylvania. Like, how can Penn benefit in a way, even if they're not in the House settlement and have a specific amount of money allocated for athletics?
I'm going to try to explain this. It gets a little complicated, but I'm going to do the best to explain this as I can. You asked if the Ivy League is going to approve this. The Ivy League doesn't have to. It can't stop it. It can complain, and it can complain in such a way to get it stopped, but it can't technically stop somebody else from doing this, which is what an NIL collective is. It is happening. It is well-timed because Fran McCaffrey is now getting started. It is not going to be the first NIL collective in Ivy League basketball. There were a lot of chatter and some confirmation from places that I heard that at Princeton and Cornell and maybe Brown, there was some money getting paid to keep some of the players. Xavier Lee, obviously, at Princeton was the biggest example. And that's okay. What I understand from the Ivy League is that the Ivy League is okay with athletes making money on the side as long as it's, in their phrase, fair market value. And my response to somebody I was talking about this was, who gets to decide fair market value? Because the concept is that the league gets to decide fair market value, which means it's their opinion. And my response was, your fair market value, if you go out and try to find a job on Wall Street or at a law firm or whatever, your fair market value is whatever anybody's willing to pay you. It's not what somebody else decides. And that's where the league is stuck, and they know it. So it basically ended up boiling down to somebody I know telling me that the league's view of things is just don't pay him $1 million and we'll look the other way. Now, I don't think Penn was going to pay him $1 million in the first place, but TJ Power did not come for free. I have very little doubt of that. And that's okay. And here's why it's okay. And I've talked about this before on Aaron's show, and I'm going to lay it out again here for people who might not have heard it. You talked about how there are no athletic scholarships in the Ivy League. There is no merit-based aid anywhere in the Ivy League. You cannot get an academic scholarship in the Ivy League. And if you step back and think about it, how could you get an academic scholarship for the Ivy League? Because everybody's probably qualified to get one in some level, right? So there's no merit-based aid in the Ivy League. You can do a work study on the side. You can work at the front desk of the dorm or in the library or in the cafe or whatever and get paid cash, not just tuition reimbursement for your labor. The Ivy League has said for all these decades that its foundational principle, other than not paying people, is that the athlete and the non-athlete are to be treated the same. So the non-athlete can do all these things. They can go and they can, as I said, work at the front desk of the dorm or in the library or in the cafe. They can create a social networking platform for the internet and license their name with it if they went to Harvard, which is what Mark Zuckerberg did. He's one of the most famous examples of this. The athlete theoretically can do all of these things, but has a constraint on their time laboring for the benefit of somebody at the university. They are laboring for the benefit of the university. The university benefits by the basketball team winning, by the football team winning, by the hockey team winning. They are laboring on behalf of the university, and they are not being compensated for it. And because of they have a time constraint within their day of going to practice or playing in a game or lifting weights or whatever it may be, they have a constraint that the non-athlete does not. Therefore, the athlete and the non-athlete are not equal. It is clear that they are not equal. Everybody knows that they are not equal. And if the athlete can't get paid and the Ivy League doesn't want to pay them, okay, let somebody else do it. And that's where an NIL collective comes in. And that is, in my opinion, what solves the problem.
And
that's without having scholarships, by the way.
And it makes perfect sense, Jonathan, because like you said, those students who aren't athletes who want to get a job at the front desk or in the library or wherever, they can get paid by those people and the athletes cannot. So now it makes sense that this is essentially their job. Someone else is paying them. It makes perfect sense. I think that is the solution in the Ivy League. Jonathan, I want to ask you a couple more questions before we get you out of here. Number one, just to zoom out overall perspective, what do you think at the end of the day about this House settlement as a whole and going forward? Just your final thoughts to wrap up here about this settlement.
It goes back to what I said at the start, which is that the broadcast contracts and the sponsorships and all that are just billions of dollars, and that money's going somewhere. And if it's not going to the people don't tune in to watch the fourth offensive line assistant coach. They don't turn in to watch the assistant to the Big Ten president stand there on TV for 3 hours. They tune in to watch the players. They buy the tickets to watch the players. The players are doing the labor. The players, obviously, in football are damaging their brains by running into each other all the time. We know this. And I watch it anyway. We all watch it anyway, even though we know what the brain damage is. The players are doing the labor, and so they ought to get paid. And I'll say one other thing, too, that is going to be up Kyle's and my alley. And Jake knew I was going to drop a soccer reference in here unless he cut my mic off, and he hasn't done it yet. So I'm going to give it a shot. Kyle works with the Philadelphia Union, and I cover the Union for the Inquirer. The Union they run their own high school for their elite prospects that they take in-house in their own youth academy. They take them into their high school. They give them a really good education. Some of those guys goes on to Ivy League schools. And the best ones turn pro when they are 16 or 17 or 18. They are earning money and getting compensated for their labor well before the ages of the 23-year-old fifth-year starting quarterback at whatever school we're going to talk about. And people may have heard of Kevin Sullivan, who's the 15-year-old kid on the Union. They just signed another 15-year-old kid to a contract whose name is Malik Yakupovich, who's apparently their next big hotshot. And I look at all of this and I say, who's in the more ethical situation? The 15-year-old who's getting paid for his labor or the 23-year-old who's not? And the answer to me is the 15-year-old who's getting paid for his labor.
Look, I think the European soccer model would have been great. I think that is completely out the window with this House settlement now, but I agree with you, Jonathan. I'm glad you brought up the soccer point because for quite some time now, I've been clamoring for the European soccer model to be enforced here in a college basketball or a college football. Somebody's really good at a smaller school. You want to buy them out? Great. You pay them a lot of money. That funds the athletic department. That funds scholarships. Staff salaries. Some of these smaller schools probably play in like middle school gyms, so you could put money into nicer facilities. I am all with you on the soccer model, but I think with this House settlement, that has now become a dream for us.
It might be, but I don't think we're ever going to see a real academy structure in football because the physical development of a human means you're not ready for the NFL until you're 22 or 23. In basketball, I can see a time where the NBA teams run their own youth academies. That's going to hurt the college game, no question. Now, obviously, not everybody's going to make it in there, so there's still going to be really good players who go to college programs. But I can see a day when the NBA teams are running their own real serious youth development structures, because that's what all the guys who come out of Europe and Africa who come over from the European professional teams, that's what they grew up in. They didn't go to college. They grew up in a system like that. I can see it happening in the United States someday.
Just going to say, in Europe and Africa and Asia, other places around the world, they play for the professional teams at 15, 16. I mean, you look at Luka Doncic, you look at Ricky Rubio, guys like that, they grew up in those systems and pro leagues, and then they came over, and obviously some had varying careers, but very, very good careers. Jonathan, one final question for you here has absolutely nothing to do with the House settlement here, but we have to ask this to every single guest. So, of course, you are our next one. You obviously have been in Philly for a long time with the Inquirer, covering a bunch of different sports. I'm sure you've come across your favorite cheesesteak spots, favorite spots to get food. So we have
I knew
to
that
ask
was
you.
what it was going to be.
We have to ask you. This is, listen, you come on the show as a guest, and this is for all guests. This is the expectation. So, Jonathan Tannenwald, where's your go-to cheesesteak spot?
So, and I've got a reason to answer this question. I'm on Blue Sky now more than Twitter. I know you guys are not yet, but I actually was talking about this on Blue Sky a couple of weeks ago. And for your troubles, I'm going to drop another soccer reference in here, but at least it's one that's not just about the union. I have a lot of friends, colleagues from around the world who are coming to Philadelphia. They're just getting here. In fact, today, as we're talking, for the Club World Cup that's at Lincoln Financial Field this month, they're going to come for the World Cup next summer. A lot of fans are going to come from all over the world, all over the country for both these tournaments. They're going to come to Philadelphia and they want a cheesesteak. They know I'm the soccer guy. They know I have a lot of international connections. So I figured I was going to get asked, which one would I send them to? And so I'm going to give you guys that one. And the answer for me is Uncle Gus's at Reading Terminal Market.
Okay.
I went there recently for the first time. I'd heard a lot of good things about it. Obviously, the Angelo's people are some of the people who were involved with it. And I know that a lot of people are going to pick Angelo's as number one. I've been there, and it's outstanding. There's no question that it's outstanding. But we know a couple things about Angelo's. One is that it takes an hour to wait in line. Two is that the neighbors around there are getting fed up that there's so many people throwing their trash all over the street. That was in our paper a couple of weeks ago. You guys probably saw it. I don't blame them for being upset. You know, it's a very residential area around there. We've all been over there plenty of times. So you're coming in for the Chelsea game or something like that. You're coming in next year for a World Cup game. You're only here for a day and a half, 2 days at most. You don't really have a ton of time. Am I going to make you go all the way down to John's Roast Pork or all the way down to Pat's and Gino's or stand in line at Angelo's for an hour or go up to D'Alessandra's or whatever? No, I'm not. I'm going to save you the time. I'm going to tell you to go to Reading Terminal Market, where Uncle Gus's makes a very good cheesesteaks. It's pretty well the same as Angelo's. It's a little smaller, which is fine by me because I don't even need to have a heart attack every time I eat one of these things. So all they do is a cheesesteak. You put a couple toppings on it, get a drink. That's it. There's no. I don't remember. I don't think there's chicken or anything else. They just do this cheesesteak. It's really good. You save yourself a bunch of time because you haven't had to take an hour or whatever to go out of the way. You gotten a really good cheesesteak, and you get to hang out in Reading Terminal Market, which is one of our great civic institutions in the city, as we all know. So that's my pick.
That is a very good answer. I love that. I mean, it's well explained, obviously, with the context of the Club World Cup and the World Cup next year. I love that. And I would argue if you want to save time, you don't want to go all the way down to 9th and Fitzwater, you don't want to go all the way down to John's Roast Pork and all that. I would say if you wanted to hop on the Market Frankfurt line and going over to Joe's in Fishtown, that's one of my favorites. That's not too far. And then if you wanted to walk a little bit down to South Street, which is also one of a popular spot in the city that people like to go to, Ishka Bibbles is also a favorite of mine.
And,
Probably
and
my
Jim's
favorite
is
chicken.
Jim's is famous and
Correct.
And very good. But I really did the bread in particular at Uncle Gus's. That roll that Angelo's does is outstanding, and the fact that they have it at Uncle Gus's breaks a tie in that regard for me. So again, I have. You can go and find the best cheesesteak, sure, but for me, as I said, there's the practical concern that I don't want to waste people's time who aren't here for all that long. I want to make sure they're making the best use of it. And it seems to me, if they're already in Center City, then why not stay there if they can? So,
Yeah, respectable answer. Cope, how about you?
Yeah, it's a very good answer there's a lot of context in that. That's not just the where's your favorite. You're going to save a lot of people a lot of time. It's hard to get. I mean, it's just like impossible to get to a John's Roast Pork unless you drive or you Uber. There's a couple places that it's kind of hard. I mean, you can go to Oregon, but that's a good answer. And I will now have to try it. I haven't been to Reading Terminal in quite some time, but I will I will have to stop there now, Jonathan. You've added another one to my list, and I think for the first time ever, Kyle, somebody's given us a spot that I had not heard of before.
Yeah. Listen, I might have to try it tomorrow.
I live in I live in Center City, so it's easy for me to walk over there. I'm there often enough that's between where I live and my office. I don't eat there too much because, as I said, I'll keel over and have a heart attack if I do. I am partial to Herschel's, the Jewish deli, and there for obvious reasons. A lot of people are partial to the Knicks for the roast pork, and I certainly don't blame them for that. But it has always been one of, as I said, one of the great civic institutions in town. And if it's a little crowded, then too bad, because that's part of the fun.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, Jonathan Tannenwald, thank you so much for coming on, talking this house settlement with us. I know it was a lot to go over, a lot to dissect. Probably still going to be some things that we're going to have to figure out as this plays out. But it's exciting to see, and we're thrilled and happy to have you on to break this all down for us. So thank you very much for that. Cope, thank you as always. Any final thoughts from you before we get out of here?
I'm going to go watch the Stanley Cup tonight. Great series. That's this how I'm lost without college basketball, Kyle, and this is how I'm filling my time. Stanley Cup.
We can help you.
Hey,
the offer has been on the table.
Get down to Subaru
It's
Park,
been out there for a few months.
I will. I'm going to have to find a date to get down there. I'll find a nice, hopefully night game on a weekend. See the sunset over the river. I'm giving you both a security deposit that I'll be down there.
All right. Listen, we got plenty in July. Plenty in July to get down here for. I believe we have 5 home games in July. So get on down to the Sub. Jonathan, I know I'll see you there. Any final thoughts before you sign off, Jonathan?
I'll see you on Saturday, and then you are not going to see me for a little while because there's going to be 8 games in 18 days at the Link in the Club World Cup.
That's right.
And that's what I'm going to be doing. It's a lot of heavy hitters coming to town, some of the biggest teams in Europe and South America. It's a dress rehearsal for the big show next year. And I think it's one the city needs because we don't get as much big-time soccer here as some other cities do. So we'll see if it gets people's attention.
Hopefully. I know our Chelsea Blues are playing. I won't be able to.
That's your fault. That's your fault.
I won't be able to watch them though because we'll be on the road for the Union. So
you picked the wrong London team, and that's your fault. That's for another. We
can save that for another podcast. We'll save that for a Spaces show or something. But Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on again, and thank you all for tuning in. As always, you know where to find us on social media at Big 5 Pod, Twitter and Instagram. And until next time, we'll see you.